Open this door right now or I'm breaking it down.
What do you want? Who called you?
Welfare check. Step outside now.
Hang on.
Last warning.
12:07 a.m. fists hammering on her apartment door. A police officer in full uniform, screaming for her to open up. 10 seconds or he's breaking it down. Elena Reyes is alone. 2 kids asleep down the hall. Exhausted from a 17-hour shift. And something feels wrong. So she does the one thing he doesn't expect. She calls 911. The dispatcher checks the system. No unit sent to her address. No welfare check. No call. That officer? He's not supposed to be there. The Ring camera captured everything. And what it recorded would send him to prison for 20 years. If you believe no woman should have to fear the people sworn to protect her, drop a comment right now saying, I stand with Elena. Subscribe if you think predators in positions of power deserve to be exposed. And smash that like button to show that mothers protecting their children will never be easy targets. Drop your location in the comments. Let's see where in the world people believe in justice. Because what happened next didn't just expose one corrupt cop. It unraveled an entire operation. Elena Reyes was 32 years old and looked like someone who hadn't slept in years because she hadn't, not properly, not the kind of sleep that restores instead of just pauses the exhaustion. She was a waitress at Franklin's Diner on Pike Street, the kind of place that served breakfast all day and attracted the late shift workers, the insomniacs, the people whose lives didn't fit into normal hours. She had just finished a double shift. 6 in the morning until 11 at night, 17 hours of carrying trays, forcing smiles, absorbing the casual cruelty of customers who didn't tip and the kindness of regulars who overtipped to compensate. Her feet ached in a way that went beyond soreness into something closer to structural damage. She had 2 children, a 7-year-old daughter and a 5-year-old son, both asleep in the bedroom they shared down the hall from her own. She was also a part-time student at Seattle Central College, taking online classes in business administration whenever she could carve out an hour between shifts, between bedtime stories, between the relentless demands of a life she was building with her bare hands. The apartment was small, 2 bedrooms, 1 bathroom, a kitchen that barely fit a table, but it was hers or would be once she finished paying rent that consumed 60% of her income. The building was old but safe, nestled in Capitol Hill where the streets were busy enough to feel watched but quiet enough at night to sleep. She had installed the Ring doorbell camera 6 months earlier after a package went missing. A small security measure that felt like a luxury at the time but necessary in a world where even small losses could derail a budget held together by hope and overtime. The pounding woke her from the shallow sleep she'd fallen into barely an hour before. Her body jolted upright, heart hammering, instincts sharpened by years of being the only line of defense between her children and anything that might harm them. She listened. The sound came again. Fists against her front door, heavy and insistent, the kind of knocking that carried threat in its rhythm. She threw off the blanket, her feet hitting the cold floor, and moved down the hallway, pausing at her children's door. She cracked it open. Both kids were still asleep, her daughter curled on her side with a stuffed rabbit tucked under her chin. Her son sprawled across his mattress in the boneless way children sleep when they feel safe. She closed the door softly. The knocking intensified. Boom, boom, boom. Urgent now, angry. Elena moved toward the front door, her hands trembling slightly, her mind running through possibilities. It was past midnight. No one she knew would come at this hour. No emergency contact. No friend. She approached the peephole, her breath shallow, and peered through. Officer James Sorrell stood in the hallway, uniform crisp, badge visible on his chest, posture rigid with authority. His face was flushed, jaw tight, eyes fixed on the door as if he could will it open through sheer force. He raised his fist and pounded again. Elena's pulse spiked. A cop. Uniform. Badge. Authority. But something felt wrong. His stance was too aggressive, his presence too sudden, too late. She pressed her hand against the door, steadying herself, and called through the wood, her voice low to avoid waking her children. She asked what this was about, why he was there, if there was a problem. Her tone carried the exhaustion of 17 hours on her feet, and the confusion of being woken by someone who should only arrive with good reason. Sorrell's response came fast and loud, cutting through the door like a blade. He claimed there was a welfare check. A disturbance reported, demanded she open the door immediately. His voice boomed, echoing in the hallway, designed to intimidate, to compel obedience through volume and authority. Elena's mind sharpened. Welfare check. She hadn't called anyone. No disturbance. Her kids were asleep. The building was quiet. She pressed again, more specific this time, requesting details: who had called, what disturbance, why now. She mentioned her children, hoping to ground the situation in reality, in the absurdity of waking a family at midnight without cause. Sorel's tone shifted into threat. He issued a final warning, ordered her to open up or face arrest, insisted she comply now or face consequences. The escalation was immediate, irrational, wrong in every procedural way Elena could sense even without legal training. Her instincts screamed. This wasn't protocol. This wasn't right. She pulled her phone from her pocket, hands shaking but deliberate, and opened the Ring app. The camera outside her door activated, recording in real time. She could see Sorel on the screen, his face filling the frame, jaw clenched, eyes hard. She started an audio recording as well, backup for whatever came next. Then she sent a quick text to her neighbor across the hall. Someone was pounding on her door? A cop? It felt wrong. Could her neighbor listen? The response came seconds later, confirming the neighbor could hear it and was recording too. Sorel pounded again, harder now, his fist striking the door in rhythmic counts. 10, 9, 8. A countdown designed to break resolve, to trigger panic, to force compliance. Elena's breath steadied. She was scared, yes, but she was also a mother. And fear in a mother doesn't paralyze, it calculates. She dialed 911, her thumb moving with precision, and waited for the dispatcher to answer. The voice came through calm and professional, asking for her emergency. Elena spoke quietly, explaining there was an officer at her door claiming a welfare check, demanding entry, threatening arrest. She asked if there was an active call to her address. The dispatcher paused, keys clicking in the background as databases were checked. The answer came back clear. No active call, no welfare check requested. No units dispatched to her location. Elena's stomach dropped. No call. No authorization. Sorel was here on his own. The dispatcher transferred her to a sergeant, whose voice carried the weight of someone who understood immediately that this situation was dangerous. Instructions came firm and clear. She should not open the door, should not engage further. Units were being dispatched now, she should stay on the line. Sorel's countdown continued. 5, 4, 3. His voice was louder now, tinged with frustration that his intimidation wasn't working, that the door remained closed. Elena stood with her back against the wall, phone pressed to her ear, Ring app still recording, heart pounding but hands steady. She could hear her neighbor's door crack open across the hall. Another witness, another camera, another layer of evidence. Sirens approached in the distance. Faint at first, then louder, cutting through the night. Sorel's pounding stopped. She heard his footsteps shift, hesitation creeping into his movements as he realized backup was coming. Real backup, authorized backup, the kind that would ask questions he couldn't answer. 2 officers arrived within minutes, ascending the stairwell with purpose. Elena heard their voices in the hallway, calm but firm, asking Sorel what he was doing there, why he was at this address, what call he was responding to. Sorel's responses were clipped, defensive, vague. The new officers asked for his badge number, his assignment, his authorization. Silence followed, heavy with implication. The sergeant on Elena's phone instructed her to open the door now that backup had secured the scene. She unlocked it slowly, her body still shielding the hallway to her children's room, and stepped into view. The 2 officers nodded at her, professional and apologetic. Sorel stood several feet back, his expression unreadable but his posture deflated. Elena held up her phone, showing the Ring footage, the timestamps, the audio recording. She explained what had happened, the pounding, the threats, the countdown, the lack of any legitimate call. The officers took notes, asked if she'd had prior contact with Sorel. She answered no, said she had never seen him before tonight. They asked her to send the footage to an internal affairs contact, handed her a card, and assured her this would be investigated. Sorel was escorted down the stairwell without another word. His boots heavy on the steps, fading into the night. Elena closed the door, locked it, engaged the deadbolt and the chain. Her hands were shaking now, the adrenaline catching up. She checked on her children again. Still asleep, still safe, oblivious to the danger that had stood just outside their home. She sat on the couch in the dark, the Ring footage playing on her phone screen, watching Sorel's face, his aggression, his entitlement, his certainty that she would comply. She had installed this camera to catch package thieves. Instead, it had caught something far more dangerous. She didn't sleep the rest of the night. She sat in the dark, replaying the footage, wondering what would have happened if she had opened the door, wondering who else he had done this to, wondering if her refusal had just saved more than her own family. By dawn, she knew she needed answers, and she was determined to find them. The morning arrived without fanfare, pale light filtering through the blinds of Elena's apartment as her children woke to a Saturday that felt, to them, like any other. She made breakfast, scrambled eggs, toast, juice, her movements automatic, her mind elsewhere. The Ring footage sat on her phone like a weight, a piece of evidence that demanded action but also triggered a slow creep of dread every time she thought about what it represented. Her daughter chattered about a cartoon she wanted to watch. Her son asked if they could go to the park. Elena nodded, smiled, agreed to both, her voice steady even as her thoughts looped back to the man at her door, the threats, the countdown, the terrifying certainty that something worse had been narrowly avoided. She replayed the footage 3 times while the kids watched television, each viewing revealing new details she'd missed in the chaos of the moment. Sorel's body language was wrong from the start. Too aggressive for a welfare check, too personal for a professional interaction. His refusal to provide details, his escalation to threats within seconds, the way he leaned into the door as if testing its strength. Every frame contradicted the story he'd tried to sell. This wasn't protocol. This was predation. By mid-morning, Elena contacted the internal affairs number the officers had given her. The investigator who answered, a woman with a voice that carried both authority and exhaustion, listened without interruption as Elena explained the incident, the footage, the 911 call confirming no dispatch. The investigator asked Elena to send the video immediately, along with the audio recording and any other documentation. Elena complied, watching the files upload with a strange mix of relief and anxiety, as if sending the evidence made it real in a way the experience itself hadn't yet. The investigator called back within 2 hours, her tone more serious now, more urgent. She explained that Sorel had been under quiet scrutiny for months following anonymous complaints from single women across the city, late-night visits, aggressive demands for entry, vague claims of welfare checks that never matched dispatch records. But the complaints had been difficult to verify without hard evidence. No recordings. No witnesses. Just stories that sounded disturbingly similar, but couldn't be substantiated in a way that would hold up under investigation. Elena's footage, combined with the 911 log proving no legitimate call had been made, was the breakthrough they'd been waiting for. A warrant was being prepared for Sorel's devices, his department-issued phone, his personal electronics, his patrol car's data logs. The investigation moved quickly after that. Warrants were executed within 48 hours. Sorel's devices were seized, his home searched, his digital footprint laid bare under the scrutiny of forensic analysts who specialized in reconstructing timelines from metadata and deleted files. What they found confirmed the investigators' worst suspicions and introduced a personal targeting element that made Elena's stomach turn. Sorel had first noticed Elena weeks earlier at a community safety fair held in a park near her apartment building. He'd been assigned to the event as part of a public outreach initiative, standing at a booth that distributed pamphlets on emergency preparedness and home security. Elena had attended with her children, part of a weekend routine that involved parks, playgrounds, anything free that got them outside and moving. She'd stopped briefly at Sorel's booth to pick up a brochure on fire safety, her daughter holding her hand, her son trailing behind with a balloon. The interaction had lasted less than a minute. Elena hadn't thought about it again. Sorel had. Investigators found notes on his phone, observations about Elena, her appearance, her children, the fact that she appeared to be alone, no partner visible, no ring on her finger. He'd followed up by running her name through police databases, accessing restricted information that included her address, her employment history, her vehicle registration, her work schedule at the diner. The queries were unauthorized, violations of policy that should have triggered automatic flags, but had slipped through due to inadequate oversight. He'd built a profile of her over weeks, tracking her movements, noting her late shifts, identifying her as what he apparently considered vulnerable prey, A single mother working long hours raising kids alone, isolated in ways he believed he could exploit. Elena read the investigator's summary in a coffee shop while her kids were at a playdate, the words blurring as her hands shook. He'd been watching her, monitoring her, planning every routine she built to survive. Dropping kids at daycare, working doubles to make rent, attending classes online late at night, had been cataloged by someone who saw her exhaustion as opportunity, her single-parent status as weakness. The violation felt total, invasive in a way that went beyond the midnight pounding. He'd turned her entire life into a target. She contacted a support group for single parents that met weekly at a community center near her building, a gathering she'd attended sporadically when time allowed. She went that Thursday night, her neighbor watching the kids, and sat in a circle of people who understood the specific isolation of raising children alone, the vulnerability that came with being the only adult in a household, the fear that lived just beneath the surface of every late-night noise. She didn't share details. The case was still active, the investigation ongoing. But she talked about feeling watched, about trusting instincts, about the importance of refusing to comply when something felt wrong. The group listened, nodded, offered solidarity. One woman mentioned installing a doorbell camera after a similar scare. Another talked about teaching her kids to call 911 if anyone ever tried to force entry. The conversation strengthened Elena's resolve. She wasn't alone in this. The fear was shared. So was the resistance. The narrative here paused, pulling back from Elena's immediate experience to address the audience directly, the camera metaphorically zooming out to invite reflection. Do you think Elena's quick thinking saved her family? The question hung in the air, an invitation to engage, to process the implications of what a different choice might have meant. Type yes or no in the comments if you'd install a Ring camera after this, or share why you'd stay vigilant. The prompt wasn't just about engagement metrics. It was about translating Elena's story into actionable awareness, about turning viewers into participants in a broader conversation about safety, autonomy, and the small tools that could shift the balance of power in moments of crisis. Elena's emotional turmoil in the days following the revelation was profound but controlled, expressed through rituals of protection rather than paralysis. She checked locks obsessively, front door, windows, balcony slider, each night before bed, her hands running over deadbolts and chains as if the physical confirmation could rebuild the sense of security that had been shattered. She talked to her children about safety in age-appropriate terms, explaining that sometimes people might pretend to be helpers, but that real helpers don't scare you, don't demand entry, don't make you feel unsafe. Her daughter asked if the man at the door had been pretending. Elena confirmed he had been, but assured her daughter he'd been caught now, that he couldn't pretend anymore. Her son asked if they were safe. Elena told him yes because she would always make sure of it. The scandal grew as more evidence surfaced. Sorel's notes extended beyond Elena to other women, names, addresses, observations about work schedules and family structures, a pattern of targeting that suggested serial behavior over months if not years. Database logs revealed dozens of improper queries, each one a breadcrumb trail leading to women living alone or parenting solo, women he'd identified as isolated, as unlikely to report, as easy. The media caught wind of the case, local news outlets running stories about a rogue officer arrested for stalking and attempted burglary, the details sanitized for broadcast but damning enough to spark public outrage. Elena's phone rang constantly, journalists requesting interviews, advocacy groups offering support, lawyers suggesting civil action. She ignored most of it, focused instead on the criminal case, on ensuring the evidence she'd provided would hold up in court, on preparing herself for the likelihood that she'd have to testify, to recount the midnight pounding, to face Sorel in a courtroom and explain why she'd refused to open the door. Sorel's arrest happened on a Wednesday morning, officers arriving at his home before dawn. The same aggressive timing he'd employed against others now turned against him. He was booked on charges of attempted burglary, stalking, misconduct, and unauthorized access of restricted databases. Bail was set high, conditions strict. He posted it within hours, but his freedom was temporary, conditional, monitored. Elena watched the news coverage from her couch, her children at school, the apartment quiet except for the television anchor's measured recitation of facts. She felt no triumph, no satisfaction, only a grim acknowledgement that justice was in motion but far from complete. The chapter ended with her staring at her phone, A text from the prosecutor's office confirming her status as a key witness, a court date months away, and a quiet understanding that her life had shifted into a new phase, one where her refusal to open a door had become the fulcrum on which a much larger case would turn. The criminal investigation expanded with the methodical precision of a system finally functioning as designed, each warrant peeling back another layer of Sorrell's pattern, each forensic analysis adding weight to what was becoming an undeniable case of serial predatory behavior. The database queries told the clearest story: dozens of unauthorized searches spanning 18 months, each one targeting single mothers, women listed as head of household in public records, addresses cross-referenced with employment databases to identify late-shift workers, vulnerable schedules, isolated living situations. Sorrell had weaponized the tools meant to protect the public, turning police databases into hunting grounds, mining personal information to construct profiles of women he deemed accessible, exploitable, alone. Device logs from his patrol car revealed more. GPS data showed repeated passes by Elena's building in the weeks before the midnight visit, drive-bys timed to her work schedule, surveillance masquerading as patrol routes. Deleted text messages recovered by forensic specialists included exchanges with other officers that hinted at a culture of looking the other way, of minimizing complaints from single women as hysteria or misunderstanding, of protecting their own even when red flags multiplied. The texts were vague enough to avoid direct complicity, but damning in their casual dismissal of patterns that should have triggered alarm. Elena filed her formal statement at the prosecutor's office on a gray morning in late autumn, her children in school, her shift at the diner covered by a coworker who'd heard about the case and insisted on helping. She sat across from two assistant prosecutors in a windowless room, recounting the midnight pounding, the threats, the countdown, the decision to call 911, the footage that captured everything. They asked detailed questions, clarifying timelines, confirming that she'd never met Sorrell before, establishing that she had no reason to expect police at her door. The ring footage was entered into evidence, time-stamped and unedited, Sorrell's face and voice clear, his threats explicit, his lack of authorization implicit in every aggressive demand. Intimidation attempts followed within days. Anonymous calls to her cell phone, hang-ups that came at odd hours, meant to unsettle, to remind her that speaking out carried risks. A car idling outside her building one evening, engine running, headlights off, sitting just long enough to be noticed before driving away. Elena reported each incident, added them to the growing file, refused to be deterred. Her neighbor provided corroborating video from the hallway, time-stamped footage that showed Sorrell's arrival, his pounding, his departure when backup arrived. The 911 transcript became another piece of the puzzle, the dispatcher's confirmation that no call had been made serving as irrefutable proof that Sorrell's presence was unauthorized, his claims fabricated. The trial began in spring, nearly a year after the midnight incident, the courtroom packed with media, advocates, and other women who'd filed complaints against Sorrell, once the investigation became public. Elena attended every day of the 2-week proceedings, sitting in the gallery, her presence a quiet refusal to be erased or intimidated. The prosecutors presented the ring footage on the second day, the courtroom falling silent as Sorrell's voice boomed through speakers, his threats echoing in a space designed for accountability. Jurors watched his face fill the screen, his aggression undeniable, his violations of protocol clear to anyone with even basic knowledge of law enforcement procedures. The settlement check arrived 6 weeks after the verdict, a sum that represented both validation and responsibility. $450,000 minus legal fees, deposited into an account Elena had opened specifically for this purpose, separate from her everyday finances, a boundary between what was hers and what belonged to a larger mission. She'd spent the week since the trial thinking about what the money meant, what it could do, how it could extend the impact of her midnight refusal beyond her own family, and into communities of people facing similar vulnerabilities. The donations were deliberate, strategic, focused on multiplying protection rather than personal comfort. $200,000 went to domestic violence shelters across Seattle, organizations that provided emergency housing, legal advocacy, and safety planning for women fleeing abusive situations. Elena met with shelter directors, explaining that the funds were earmarked for technology upgrades, security cameras, panic buttons, reinforced doors, the kinds of tools that turned vulnerable spaces into fortresses. $150,000 funded single-parent support programs, expanding services like emergency childcare, legal aid, financial counseling, resources that address the isolation and exhaustion that made parents like her visible targets. Another $100,000 established a home security grant program for low-income families, providing free installation of doorbell cameras, motion sensor lights, deadbolts, window alarms, the small barriers that could mean the difference between safety and intrusion. Elena kept a modest portion for herself, enough to cover a semester's tuition, to build a small emergency fund, to replace her car's failing transmission, but the bulk of the settlement flowed outward, transforming her personal justice into communal protection. She met with each organization's leadership, explaining that the grants came with a request that recipients be taught not just how to install the technology but how to use it as evidence, how to document encounters, how to trust their instincts when something felt wrong. The directors agreed, building training sessions into their programming, creating workshops that combined home security with legal rights education. The Seattle Police Department's reforms took shape in parallel, driven by the verdict's mandate and the public scrutiny that followed. An independent review board was established, composed of civilians with expertise in law enforcement oversight, civil rights, community advocacy. The board operated with subpoena power, the authority to investigate complaints without interference from department leadership, to recommend disciplinary action, to publish findings in public reports. Database access protocols were overhauled, every query now requiring documented justification, supervisory approval for searches outside active cases, automated flags for patterns that suggested misuse. The flags were programmed to alert when an officer's searches concentrated on specific demographics: single mothers, women living alone, addresses queried multiple times without corresponding case files, the exact pattern Sorrell had established. Training programs on predatory recognition were mandated for all officers, sessions that taught supervisors to identify red flags in their subordinates' behavior, to question late-night wellness checks without dispatch authorization, to take seriously complaints from vulnerable populations. The training included case studies, Sorrell's case among them, used as a cautionary tale of how unchecked authority could metastasize into systemic harm. Elena was invited to speak at one session, sharing her perspective not as a victim, but as a citizen whose refusal to comply had exposed failures at every level. She accepted. Her presentation focused on the instincts that had kept her door closed, the technology that had documented the truth, the importance of listening when someone says they feel unsafe. 2 more women came forward in the months after Sorrell's conviction, their stories similar to the others but previously unreported due to fear, shame, uncertainty that they'd be believed. The new reports added charges to Sorrell's record, extending his sentence, ensuring that appeals would fail under the weight of accumulated evidence. The women credited Elena's case with giving them courage, with proving that documentation and persistence could overcome the institutional inertia that often protected officers over civilians. Elena returned to her routine with a sense of purpose that transformed the ordinary into something deliberate. Her shifts at the diner continued, her interactions with customers now tinged with an awareness that everyone carried stories, vulnerabilities, strengths hidden beneath the surface of polite transactions. Her college classes progressed, her essays often exploring themes of accountability, technology's role in justice, the specific challenges facing single parents in systems designed for 2-parent households. She graduated 2 years after the trial, her children in attendance, her diploma a marker of persistence through chaos. She began giving talks at community centers, libraries, parent groups, anywhere people gathered who might benefit from her experience. The presentations were straightforward, practical, focused on home safety, rights during police encounters, the importance of trusting instincts even when authority figures demanded compliance. She showed edited ring footage from the midnight incident, Sorrell's face blurred for legal reasons but his threats clear, his aggression undeniable. Audiences watched in silence, then asked questions about installation costs, about when to call 911, about how to teach children to be safe without instilling paranoia. Elena answered each question with specificity, drawing on her own learning, her mistakes, her hard-won knowledge. Her building saw a wave of doorbell camera installations after her first community talk, neighbors who'd heard about the case deciding that the small investment was worth the potential protection. The building's landlord offered to subsidize installations for tenants who couldn't afford the upfront cost, a gesture that spread to other properties in the neighborhood, creating a network of documented spaces where misconduct would be harder to hide. Years passed. Sorrell remained in Washington State Penitentiary, his appeals exhausted, his career obliterated, his name now synonymous with the abuse of power he'd once wielded without consequence. Elena's children grew, her daughter now a teenager with questions about the night she'd slept through, her son old enough to understand that their mother's refusal to open a door had changed more than just their lives. Elena answered their questions honestly, framing the story not as heroism but as instinct, as the kind of decision any parent would make when protecting their children felt more important than obeying authority. Her story became part of police training curricula beyond Seattle, used in academies across the state as an example of how technology and civilian vigilance could serve as checks on misconduct, how a single documented encounter could unravel patterns of predation, how accountability wasn't just a concept but a practice that required institutional support. Trainers emphasized that Elena hadn't been an activist, hadn't been connected to advocacy networks, had simply been a tired mother who trusted her gut and refused to comply with demands that felt wrong. The lesson wasn't that civilians should distrust all police, but that healthy systems encouraged questioning, documentation, verification, that good officers welcomed oversight because it protected everyone. The broader impacts of the case were measurable in ways both statistical and anecdotal. Predatory incidents involving officers in Seattle decreased, partly due to stricter oversight, partly due to cultural shifts within the department that made misconduct riskier, less likely to be ignored. Public trust in accountability mechanisms increased, surveys showing that residents felt more confident reporting concerns, more assured that complaints would be investigated, rather than dismissed. Domestic violence shelters reported higher rates of technology adoption among residents, women installing cameras and alarms before leaving abusive situations, creating evidence that strengthened restraining orders in criminal cases. Elena's life settled into a quiet rhythm that bore little resemblance to the chaos of the trial years. She took a management position at the diner, her schedule more predictable, her income more stable. She dated occasionally, cautiously, her instincts now finely tuned to red flags, to patterns that suggested control or surveillance. She remained single by choice, content in a life built around her children, her work, her community involvement. She spoke less frequently about the case as years accumulated, the story becoming something she'd lived through rather than something that defined her. But she never refused requests from advocacy groups, legal aid organizations, anyone who believed her experience could help others navigate their own crises. The chapter closed with an image years removed from the midnight pounding, Elena sitting on a park bench near her building, watching her children play on equipment they'd climbed 100 times before. They were laughing, chasing each other, oblivious to the histories that shaped their safety. She watched them with the kind of contentment that comes from survival, from knowing that one decision, one refusal to turn a lock, one insistence on documentation, one call to 911, had shifted trajectories for her family and for strangers she'd never meet. The closed door had become a symbol, not just of her resistance but of a principle that extended beyond her story. That vulnerability doesn't equal weakness, that exhaustion doesn't preclude vigilance, that the smallest acts of refusal can trigger reckonings that dismantle systems of harm. She'd opened no door that night, but she'd opened possibilities for accountability, for reform, for futures where mothers wouldn't have to choose between obeying authority and protecting their children because authority would operate within bounds that made such choices unnecessary. The sun shifted through the trees, casting long shadows across the playground. Her daughter called out, asking if they could stay longer. Elena checked her watch, calculated dinner timing, homework schedules, the ordinary logistics of a life no longer defined by crisis. She agreed they could stay, and she watched her children play, knowing that one closed door had changed everything.